Welcome to the Kentucky Kid, everyone. I'm your host, Kelly Berry. Thank you for joining me here this week. A lot to talk about this week, including the NFL draft, which was last night, beginning first round anyway, later rounds coming tonight, and then later on into the weekend. Has anybody ever watched How I Met Your Mother, though? It's one of those shows that comes on about midway through the afternoon, most channels, and it's one of those really good shows when nothing else is on, right? There's one episode that I was watching several months ago where the main group, they all hang out at this bar, right? And the bar owner dies. And the funeral for the bar owner is the same day as the Super Bowl. Well, they all have this tradition where they buy beer, they buy wings, they do the traditional American, we're going to buy beer, wings, and watch the Super Bowl, okay? They can't do it because they have to go to this bar owner's funeral. So what they do is they DVR the game and they all vow that they're going to try as hard as they possibly can to not find out who won the game so they can have as authentic a feel as possible. They spend the following Monday doing whatever is necessary to try and avoid finding out, until Barney finally ruins it for all of them, spills the beans, and they all know. They're all sitting in an apartment, and they're kind of bummed for a minute, right? Oh man, why'd you tell us who won the game? Then finally they all kind of look around and go, you know, we still have beer, we still have wings, we still have the game. Screw it, we're going to watch the game anyway. We're just going to enjoy it as much as we always do. And they did. I bring that up because of this. CBS Sports correspondent, first name is Jason. I cannot pronounce his last name to save my life. I'm not even going to try. But he was tweeting out the draft picks before ESPN announced them. Here's the thing about this, okay? This is pretty common. Okay, a lot of NFL insiders from various networks over the course of the years have tweeted out picks before they happened. Okay, Adam Schefter at ESPN is a prime example, alright? I think he did that last year. ESPN and the NFL Network were covering the game, or the draft, excuse me. And they pretty much told all of their NFL correspondents who were at the draft or had any knowledge about the draft, don't tweet out picks. Not pictures, actual picks of the players. Okay, so they went completely silent. But this Jason fellow works for CBS Sports. And he could do whatever he wanted to. So he was tweeting out the draft picks and beating ESPN by anywhere from about 30 seconds to 5 minutes. Now, I follow him on Twitter. A lot of sports fans do. I personally did not mind this at all. In fact, I kind of enjoyed it. I enjoyed knowing as soon as the player knew that they were being drafted. All right, it provided an authentic feel. It was a live feel to the draft. But a lot of individuals hated it. Okay, he got tweets like, can't believe you're ruining the draft. How dare you do this? Do these people not realize that you can log out of Twitter? Okay, there's that nice little thing up at the right-hand corner up at the top. Log out. Right? All right, if you don't want to know, log out. Unfollow him. Do whatever you have to do, but don't sit there and be on his page, man. I can't believe you're doing this. And then just keep watching it. I mean, you have a choice. He's not dictating you on his page. He's not ordering you to be on his page. There's no legal reprimands for not following him. If you don't want to know, just log off. It's that simple. Okay? If you don't want to know, there's an easy way, and it's called logging out or powering off. And just watching it, and that can be your own authentic feel. Alright, but don't blame Jason for doing his job, because in the end, he's a journalist, he's a reporter. And what's a journalist and a reporter's job? To bring the information as soon as it's available. That's what he was doing. It was perfectly fine to me that he was doing it, and anybody that has an issue with that can unfollow him or log off. Don't complain about it. But moving on to the actual draft, though. And I mentioned in, I believe it was the last show or 2 shows ago, I can't remember exactly whenever I said this, but I said this was going to be a reactionary draft, at least a lot more so than previous drafts, okay? Up until about 15 minutes before the draft, almost everybody in the country thought that Luke Joeckel was going to be the first overall pick. And right at the last minute, Kansas City changes their mind, and they go to Eric Fisher instead. Plays the exact same position, pretty much plays it the exact same way. It's offensive tackle for those that don't know. The difference between Fisher and Joeckel is this, okay? Joeckel is the more polished player, and Fisher is the better athlete and has the higher ceiling, higher potential. Remember, I've talked about this, okay? But it's not a bad pick. There were some really bad picks in the draft, but life is short. Let's eat dessert first for a second, okay? Let's start with the best picks, okay? Now, my criteria for the best pick is not the best player per se, but it's the best value, okay? It's what you're getting based on where you are at the draft. I thought Luke Joeckel was the best player overall. And he was picked number 2 by Jacksonville. And this is a good pick for a couple of reasons. Number 1, as I said, phenomenal player, okay? Very, very polished offensive tackle. Can come in, play left tackle, which is the most important position in the game, at least on the offensive line, unless your quarterback is left-handed, in which case it would be the right tackle. It's the tackle that protects the blind side of the quarterback. Okay? Anybody who watched the movie Blind Side, that's what the term comes from, okay? You protect the side of the quarterback that he's not inclined to look at all the time. But I thought he was the best player at that position. Okay, and another thing that Jacksonville does, they avoid reaching for a quarterback too early. Okay, this draft did not have that many good quarterbacks, okay? And I'll get to the quarterback situation here in just a minute. But they could have, and a lot of people thought that they might reach and get a quarterback with the 2nd overall. I thought they did a phenomenal job giving Blaine Gabbert another opportunity to prove himself in the NFL and filling a need that was a lot bigger than the quarterback position for the Jaguars. Moving down 2 picks, though, Philadelphia was another team that avoided potential catastrophe by not reaching for a quarterback too early. They drafted Lane Johnson. Now, a lot of people thought they were going to draft Dion Jordan, but you can't draft a player twice, and Miami beat him to the punch. Dion Jordan was a phenomenal player, and I really, really wished he could have gotten to play for Philadelphia with his former coach in college, Chip Kelly. Didn't work out. What Philadelphia does is the exact same thing that Jacksonville does. Okay? They say we can get a quarterback, and we need a quarterback, but we have another need that's bigger at the time. And Lane Johnson's a good player. All right? Haven't watched a lot of him, but what I've heard, he moves very well, blocks very well. That's what you need. Another offensive tackle, probably going to be a left tackle in the NFL. And if it doesn't work out as a left tackle, you can always ship him to the right side. All right. Number 10. Another solid pick, another offensive lineman. This draft was loaded with offensive linemen. And linemen in general, okay? 16 of the 32 first-round picks, offensive or defensive linemen. Chance Warmack was another good one. And I thought at his position, at that offensive guard spot, he was by far and away the best. Okay, by far and away. He can pull really well, he run blocks really well, and he's a very good interior pass blocker. Okay, he's not going to let a defensive tackle beat him when the quarterback's under center. And he's going to be able to run block and push forward. And let me tell you something, Chris Johnson loved this pick. Because for the longest time, he has not been able to run on the inside. And a lot of people have complained about Chris Johnson. Oh, he just runs outside. I'd run outside too if my interior lineman couldn't block for me. Okay? You run away from the defense, but now Johnson can hit the hole, and Sean Green, a new acquirement from the Jets, who's more of a power runner than Chris Johnson is and is more inclined to run between the tackles anyway, has a good offensive lineman to run behind. Very, very solid pick at the 10th pick. Moving on down to 23, and there were some good draft picks in between 10 and 23, I thought, but not good enough for me to spend hours upon hours talking about them. Sharif Floyd, though, defensive tackle from Florida. This was a guy that was projected to go top 10, maybe even top 5, excuse me. He was projected as the second best defensive tackle in this draft, in a draft that had a lot of good defensive tackles. And so you know right there he's a good player. Okay, he plays in a running conference in the SEC, an interior running conference in the SEC, and he was a run stuffer. Fell all the way outside of the top 10, outside of the top 20. Here comes Minnesota at 23, and they got a steal. Probably the biggest steal in this year's draft so far. This was a guy, like I said, top 10 potential, maybe top 5 potential. Really, really high ceiling for this guy. Played very well at the University of Florida. Tended to take a play or two off here and there. Tended to be a little bit inconsistent, but a lot of defensive tackles, especially coming out of college, tend to be. What you want out of a defensive tackle, though, is athleticism and strength. And he has both of them and will be able to have an impact right away in the NFL in a team, or on a team in the Minnesota Vikings that needs an interior defensive lineman badly. But the best draft pick as far as filling a need is concerned was Matt Elam at 32. A lot of people had an issue with this pick. Okay, safety out of Florida. But the Ravens had more needs than what Manti Te'o could fill. And I bring Manti Te'o up because that's who a lot of people thought the Ravens should get. Now, I've been known to be critical of Te'o before. He's slow. I don't think he's that strong. He makes good tackles, but if you're an inside linebacker, you should be able to do that anyway. But this Ravens team, in addition to everything else that they lost off of that Super Bowl winning team a year ago, lost both of their starting safeties. Both of them. They needed a safety. And Elam was not just a good safety, he was probably the best player overall that was available right there. Very, very good pick. Another potential steal for them. Well, that's dessert. Time to get to the nasty celery of sorts of this draft. And, well, let's begin with a team that's notorious for screwing up some drafts in the Cincinnati Bengals. Alright, the Cincinnati Bengals are an uprising team. Alright, they're a team that did really well in the past couple of drafts, got a quarterback in... Why am I drawing a mental blank? What is that guy's name? Dalton. All right, third-round quarterback, came in, produced right away, and they've been able to build a team around him. I thought they would continue with that trend and maybe start to amend previous mistakes, right? Wrong. They go out and they get another tight end. All right, they have so many more needs than a tight end right now. And I realize that a tight end is one of the better positions in the current NFL, the way that it's played. All right, I get that. But you already have Jermaine Gresham. All right, and it's not that Jermaine Gresham is an elite tight end, per se, but he's a really, really good one. Really, really good one. All right, and I'm not so sure that Dalton is a good enough quarterback to support two tight ends. Okay, think of the other quarterbacks that have been able to support two tight ends. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees. Okay, there might be a few others, but you have to be a really, really good really good quarterback to be able to support two tight ends and to justify taking a tight end when you already had a really good one with the 21st overall pick. I just don't see this being a good pick. It's not that Efford isn't a good player. It's not. All right, he's one of the better tight ends of late to come into the draft. But you didn't need him. And if you don't need somebody in the first round, don't draft him. Period. Another guy, and this is somebody that I've mentioned before as being a great athlete but not a great player, Cordarrelle Patterson. Now, the Minnesota Vikings need a replacement for Percy Harvin. All right, they need one. But there were some other good wide receivers left. All right? Robert Woods, for example, a very, very polished player. Not the greatest athlete, per se. Patterson's got him beat in athleticism. But when you're taking a wide receiver, it's not necessarily important to have the greatest athlete in the wide receiver spot anymore. What you need is a guy that can run routes, find holes in the zone. Take Wes Welker, for example. Is Wes Welker a good athlete? No. Wes Welker is not a good athlete. He's not big. He's not that fast. He's not that strong. You know what he does? He runs great routes and he finds holes in zones. He finds holes in defense. That's what he does. And that's what you need in a wide receiver in today's game. Not somebody like Cordarrelle Patterson who's got a great 40 time and can run really well and can jump really high, but can't really catch. Okay, that's kind of something you need with the wide receiver spot. But the absolute dumbest pick, okay? Effort was dumb, Patterson was dumber. This one was dumbest. I about crapped a cow whenever I saw this, okay? Better statement, I about crapped a Buffalo, because the Buffaloes were the guy that were the team that drafted him. Buffalo, to me, is a team that is thoroughly committed to being awful. Alright, there are some teams that are committed to being really good. They found their system, they found what works. Take the Patriots, for example. Okay, what do? Every single year? They trade down, they get a lot of draft picks, they replenish their roster. That works for them. What do the Bills do? They get rid of a previous quarterback that was okay but inconsistent, and then they draft another quarterback who, oh wait, he's inconsistent too. E.J. Manuel couldn't win with Florida State that consistently. Florida State was a team that was loaded with talent compared to the other teams that they were playing. Just absolutely loaded. And it's not that E.J. Manuel is a bad player, but he's got an inconsistent arm, very, very powerful arm. His reads are somewhat slow, though. And you're telling me that a guy who is erratic with his passes, throws too many interceptions, and makes slow reads, and stays too long in the pocket, and is going to take a buttload of hits, is worth a 16th overall pick? Come on. Seriously, Buffalo. Quit being committed to being terrible. Quit ruining draft picks. Start getting other players, because you're starting to become the Browns. You don't replace one mediocre quarterback with another mediocre quarterback. You bring in a decent one and you build a team around him and you hope it works. So I've covered the best picks in the draft. I've covered the worst picks in the draft. Now it's time for those draft picks where there's a lot of potential, but also a lot of potential for failure. The boom or the bust. And as usual, Cleveland finds their way on this list. Now, they did a lot of good by not drafting a quarterback. I give them props. Congratulations, Cleveland. You didn't throw away another season, at least not that way. Look, Mingo is a great player. Great athlete anyway, okay? But he's undersized for the style that he plays. Now, the style that he plays as an outside linebacker, he doesn't cover it all. Alright? What he is he is a defensive end outside linebacker hybrid. He comes in from a standing up position and he rushes the quarterback. That's what he does, and that's fine. But you have to be a little heavier than the average outside linebacker to do that. Why? Because you're not covering guys. What you're doing is you're trying to blow past offensive tackles. Alright? And offensive tackles, though, are big, so you need to be able to withstand a hit or two. Right? The guy weighs a lot less than the average person that plays that position that way. So he's either going to have to really bulk up, or he's going to have to learn how to cover some guys in the slot. Now, he has the athleticism to cover, so that is a possibility. And it's not that hard to change your game or to tweak your game or to bulk up in the NFL. A lot of people have done it. The main issue that I have with Mingo, though, is there aren't a lot of results from his college season. Great athlete, but sometimes lacked the instincts to make the great plays, whereas, I mean, he had the athleticism to make a lot of plays, but not the instincts to. You need those instincts in the NFL, and they could come. But if they don't, this is a bust pick. If they do come, this could be the best pick in this draft. That's why it's a boom or a bust. It's either going to be really good or really terrible. There's no middle ground. Another guy with some size issues, and he's the guy that I would label like the fun size candy bar. Okay? Tavon Austin. He's 5'8". And 5'8" receivers can succeed in the NFL. Just ask Wes Welker. Okay? They can do it. He's a phenomenal athlete. He knows how to catch. He knows how to run in space. He knows how to operate in space. Alright? That's great for a wide receiver. He can return punts. He can return kicks. He can play all 3 downs on offense. So he's really a 4-down guy, right? But when you take into consideration how small he is, can he withstand playing 4 straight downs over the course of a 16-game season? I don't know. And again, we come back to the boom or the bust. If he can withstand it, he's got the athleticism, he's got the hands, he's got the speed, he's got the catching ability to be a great player. But if he can't withstand that and he's injury riddled, then he becomes a bust at the 8th pick overall for the St. Louis Rams. Again, no middle ground with him or Mingo. You're either going to be really, really good or you're going to be really, really terrible. And that's what we'll find out in the next couple of years. As big as the draft story is, and believe me, it's a big one, perhaps just as big a story in the sense that this sport is actually taking place right now, comes out of the NBA. And the NBA playoff first round is taking place right now. And most of the series really aren't going to be that good. I'll get to that here in just a minute. But Russell Westbrook, point guard out of Oklahoma City, tore his lateral meniscus and is going to undergo season-ending injury to repair it. Absolutely huge loss for Oklahoma City. I still think that they get past the Rockets. Alright, I don't think the Rockets are good enough to beat them. The thing about this is, though, last year's Oklahoma City Thunder team got to the NBA Finals. And they got to the NBA Finals primarily out of the scoring of Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden in that order. James Harden's gone. He's with the Rockets. Okay? Now Russell Westbrook is gone. So you've gone from 3 really good scorers a year ago to 1. Now I think Kevin Durant is good enough to lead them through the Rockets pretty much primarily on his own. Alright, he can do that. He's that good of a scorer. Probably the best pure scorer in the country right now. But it's going to make it harder on them without Russell Westbrook to get to the finals again and to really challenge other teams in the West, even though the Western Conference is really banged up right now. A quote from GM Thunder Sam Presti about this injury, quote, "Our players' health is our first and foremost concern. The Thunder's medical team and several specialists we consulted with determined that Russell undergo a procedure to address the issue," that issue meaning the lateral meniscus. "We have thoroughly discussed this with Russell. Despite being the competitor and teammate that he is, he respects and understands the decision and is committed to come back even stronger." Close quote. I mentioned before that I thought the Thunder were good enough to beat the Rockets in 4 games. Without Russell Westbrook, they could still win in 4. I'd give it 5, though, because I think there's one game in there where the Rockets will just be really, really dominant in scoring, because they're a team like that. Every 5, 6, 7 games, they'll pull a 120-point contest out of their butt. Alright, they will. They're capable of that. But getting to the other series in the West, the Spurs-Lakers, another couple of banged-up teams. Kobe Bryant's gone. The Spurs' big 3 and Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan, and Tony Parker all banged up and really old. But the Spurs lead this series 2-0, and really it hasn't been that close either game. I think the Spurs could sweep this series. I really do. The Lakers have shown absolutely no competitive drive throughout this series. Plus, with the loss of Blake, the fact that Dwight Howard really hasn't been that dominant in the post, and there's not really another scorer in the backcourt to supplement the losses of Bryant and of Blake, I don't see any reason why the Lakers even win a game in this series. I think the Spurs win this one in 4. The only series that's tied right now is between the Denver Nuggets and the Golden State Warriors. And the only reason it's tied right now is because the Warriors pulled a 51 of 79 shooting performance in Game 2 to become the second team to win on the road, the Bulls being the first. They won that game in Denver 131 to 117. As great as that performance was, in order to win this series, they have to have at least 2 more just like it. I don't think it's feasible. Because I know Denver has their struggles on the road, but they're a really dominant home team. And Golden State, unless they score at this clip in at least 2 more games, I don't think they can win this series. I'm still taking the Nuggets in 6 in this one, especially considering that David Lee is hurt and is done for the season. The 4-5 matchup, the final series out in the West, is between the Clippers and Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies finally won a game in this one, making the series 2-1. The Clippers in the first 2 games, they didn't dominate per se, but they won them. Alright, and a 2-1 series lead is big. I think the Clippers win their next game. I think they probably go on to win this series. I'm going to give it 6 games just to be conservative. I think the Grizzlies are good enough to win another one, not good enough to push the Clippers to 7, not good enough to win this series. So that's the Western bracket. On to the East. And the series in the East that I'm about to talk about has been by far the most competitive. That might have been the biggest lie I've ever told in my life. It's been by far the least competitive playoff series I have ever witnessed in my life, and it's the Heat and the Bucks. The Heat winning 3 games in a row is one thing. The Heat winning 3 games in a row by double digits is another. The Heat winning their 3rd game by double digits in a row on the road with Ray Allen being the leading scorer. Come on, Bucks. Really? I mean, at least make this somewhat interesting, okay? Have Brandon Jennings either score 50 or tear something. Give us some excuse as to why you are so terrible in this series. I know the Heat are by far and away the best team in the NBA. There's no question about that. And I know by far and away you're the worst team in the playoffs right now. But it's still the playoffs. Even the 1-16 NCAA tournament games, at least a couple of those were close. Give us something to watch. Please. I'm begging you. Something. Anything. I don't care what it is. Give us something that's worthy of note to take out of this series. Not, well, the Heat beat us in 4 games. Which is probably going to happen because right now you've shown absolutely no ability to compete in any way, shape, or form. Knicks and the Celtics, there's been a debate about this as to whether or not the Knicks are winning this series or if the Celtics are losing this series. To me, they're one and the same. Okay, Carmelo Anthony has continued his scoring spurt. Alright, he has gone for some big numbers in this playoff series so far. The Knicks are up 2-0, by the way. J.R. Smith has played well. The Celtics look old. And I think we're finally beginning to see what I thought we would see about 3 years ago. We are seeing a Celtics team that's tired, that's old, whose stars are old and tired. And there's no one on that bench that's taking up the mantle right now. I forget how many games I said this series was going to go to. Revamp it. This could be a sweep. Because right now, the Celtics have yet to show us that they can compete through 4 quarters. Now, the Bucks haven't shown us that they compete in any quarters. Alright, the Celtics have at least showed us that they can compete in 2 or 3. But that's not enough. To win a game, to push the Knicks, you have to compete for all 4 quarters. And right now, I just think the Celtics are too old and tired to do that. On to the Pacers and Hawks. Now, this series, based on who's won, I mean, the Pacers are up 2-0, but this has probably been perhaps the second closest series in the entire playoffs outside of the Nets and the Bulls, as far as the way each game has been played. Alright, the Pacers and the Hawks are pretty comparable when it comes to decent backcourt, really good front court. Alright, but I think the Pacers are still going to win this series, and here's why. They still have the ability, as I've mentioned before, to grind out a game and to force any team that they play to play at their pace, regardless of venue, regardless of opponent. They are going to make you play a grind-out, slow, pathetic pace, half-court game. And I don't think the Atlanta Hawks are good enough to win this series playing that way. They might win a game here and there, and I'll give this series to 6, but it's not going to be that competitive. Finally, the Nets and the Bulls, and I predicted the Nets to win this series in 7, and right now they're down 2-1. Luol Deng, small forward from Chicago, is probably the best player that no one ever talks about. Alright, when Derrick Rose has gone down, when Carlos Boozer has been banged up, whenever Joakim Noah's been banged up, he always has seemed to be that one guy who, in the absence of stars, steps up and plays phenomenal games. And I'm not talking about phenomenal like he drops 40 points. I'm talking about phenomenal, he takes what he does and he just adds more of it. He goes from averaging like 15 points a game to 18 to 22. Alright, he takes what he does and he just makes it better. Those are the guys that I like watching. The guys that are willing to be secondary players when the stars are on the court, but when the stars are missing, he steps up and plays even better than he usually does. I still think the Nets win this series, and I still think they win in 7, because I still believe that despite the way that Luol Deng has played, and despite the way that Carlos Boozer and especially Joakim Noah have been able to battle back from injury, I don't think that they're good enough to win this series. And I think the Nets' backcourt will end up proving why they are the better one in this one. Really looking forward to the rest of the draft. I still think it'll be interesting to see where, among others, guys like Geno Smith, Manti Te'o, and there are a few other names out there. Really looking forward to seeing where those guys end up. I'll probably have coverage of that next week, but until then, keep watching that draft, keep watching the NBA playoffs. I'll see you next week. God bless.